Together, we're going to ponder the differences that exist or should exist between the methods of study in social science, economic science, the science in which we are the subjects, and the methods of study in the natural sciences, physics, chemistry, etc., in which the objects of research are inanimate entities, that is, they have no soul, from the outside world. To begin our exploration of the topic, let us consider the Hayek hypothesis. As you know, Friedrich Hayek, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974, was perhaps Mises's most brilliant disciple. Hayek, in his book The Sensory Order, proposes a hypothesis which we will call, take note, the Hayek hypothesis on the hierarchical classifications of orders of phenomena according to their degree of complexity. To better illustrate and explain the Hayek hypothesis, I'm going to introduce this triangle, this inverted pyramid, which is divided according to degree of complexity. The vertex at the bottom, you see, degree of complexity, refers to phenomena which are relatively less complex, thus the minus sign, relatively less complex phenomena. As we move up the triangle, we come to relatively more complex phenomena. The narrow vertex indicates that the phenomena or orders studied have a lower degree of complexity, and the inverted base at the top indicates that as we move upward, the phenomena progressively increase in complexity. To the right, we note the different sciences according to their object of research. There we see that physics focuses on phenomena that are relatively simpler in terms of their degree of complexity. Another science examines phenomena similar to those studied in physics, but with a somewhat higher degree of complexity. It is the science that studies chemical phenomena, chemistry, because now there are reactions. These reactions take place between different chemical compounds and give rise to different molecules, etc. We could even make a leap in the degree of complexity and analyze different organs. For example, a human or bovine liver or a brain, from the viewpoint of a biologist, as objects of study or research in biology. Biology examines much more complex phenomena, but it rests on chemistry and physics. The elements are now cells, which result in certain organs or organisms, but we can and do analyze them, though with greater difficulty, because they are more complex. We rely on the sciences further down in the triangle, like chemistry and physics, because they focus on relatively simpler phenomena. Now we take a qualitative leap and begin to study phenomena that are far more complex. The phenomena we have considered up to now, the ones which I have mentioned and which physics, chemistry, biology and the natural sciences in general focus on, we will refer to as World 1 phenomena, so that we understand among ourselves that we are referring to the relatively simpler phenomena, though they are of varying degrees of complexity, which natural scientists study. But now we take a qualitative leap past the up arrow and we begin to study much more complex phenomena. In fact, Hayek tells us that the spontaneous market order, or if you prefer, society, is the most complex order that exists in the universe. The foundation is human action, which we have been studying together, with its different components, and the exercise of creative entrepreneurship by all of the people who make up humanity and who interact among themselves and thus give rise to society. Society is an extremely complex network of human interactions. We defined it the other day. Such interactions basically consist of exchange relationships fueled by the creativity of entrepreneurship, which constantly creates, transmits, and coordinates. It creates and transmits information. It coordinates the maladjusted behavior of human beings, and it does so in a competitive manner. All of this results in the boundless multiplication of life, understood as an ever greater number of human beings who enjoy an ever higher quality of life. That limitless expansion, the social Big Bang I was telling you about, well, the study of those phenomena would pertain to World 2. It is possible to imagine even more complex orders. We'll leave the possibility of them open, but we won't discuss them now. Still, we can imagine the existence of an order that is much more complex than the most complex order we can conceive of, which is that of society. I have called this higher order the supreme order. You can label it God if you want to. In any case, it is the order of a world that is far beyond us. We'll call it World 3, and leave it at that hypothetical description. At this point, now that we have introduced our diagram, we are ready to consider the hypothesis Hayek proposes in his book, The Sensory Order. Hayek says the following. Take note. He says that an order can come to understand, to comprehend, to explain, to account for, if you will, orders that are simpler or less complex than itself. But it can never explain nor account for itself. Nor can it explain or account for orders more complex than itself. What reason does Hayek give for this idea? He says that each order is like a network or structure of elements and categories. We've all been children. Think of a Meccano set. Do you remember building with a Meccano set? We built structures. Well, Hayek says that into a structure, a set of related elements and categories, we can integrate or include and also understand a simpler Meccano building. That is, a structure or order with fewer categories and less complex relationships between them than is true of the order we start with. However, what we cannot even conceive of is an order which, with its particular degree of complexity, includes and accounts for itself and its own complexity. Nor can we imagine an order which includes and accounts for orders more complex than itself. Let's apply this Hayekian idea to the pyramid. An understanding of chemistry requires a science. Physics that focuses on simpler orders. And biology relies on both chemistry and physics. Hayek says that it is inconceivable for physics, which lies at the narrow vertex and studies relatively less complex phenomena, to account for and make clear the more complicated phenomena of biology. Instead, the reverse is true. Biology, which focuses on more complex phenomena, includes or incorporates physical and chemical phenomena. Now we come to the creative human mind, to the intelligence of human beings. As a phenomenon, I place the human mind very close to human action, as we have seen. Well, the human mind can account for and study physics. And indeed, every year a Nobel Prize in Physics is awarded, and physics is advancing. Chemistry is as well, though somewhat more awkwardly. Biology and medicine are moving forward too, but they face many more obstacles. Medicine is not such an exact science as chemistry, which lends itself to laboratory experiments involving reactions. We know for sure that if two atoms of hydrogen bond with one atom of oxygen, the result is H2O, a molecule of water. In medicine, we may know, for instance, that of every 1,000 tumors with certain characteristics, 80% resolve. But now we are dealing with a much more complex order. Still, we can, with our minds, account for biological phenomena. And we can, with our minds, understand something about human action and society, though with far greater difficulty because these are immensely more complex phenomena. And we can develop a discipline, economic science, which we are studying together. This is a much more difficult undertaking, however. It is much harder to practice economic science than to study physics, chemistry or biology, despite appearances. At any rate, the human mind cannot account for itself nor replicate itself. The human mind can, for instance, under certain circumstances, induce nuclear fusion or chemical reactions, or perform a liver transplant. But the human mind cannot replicate itself. According to Hayek's hypothesis, an order cannot fully explain itself, nor account for itself, nor replicate itself. It is interesting to note the important implications of Hayek's idea. It would mean that the entire scientific program of artificial intelligence, that is, the attempt to replicate the mind of a human being, is doomed to failure. In other words, artificial intelligence is a pompous term. I suppose we could advance by inventing a very fast calculator or a computer that calculates at the speed of light, but those are really just dumb machines, if you will. They merely reproduce certain mechanical behaviors, depending on how the machines have been programmed. Perhaps we could place such a machine inside a robot and give an anthropomorphic impression that there is a human being there, but there really isn't one. What I'm trying to say is that it is a mystery how we create with our minds and why we create. And we are not able to create ourselves, to make creative human beings, according to the Hayek hypothesis. Furthermore, we are most certainly not able, with our minds, to account for orders of a higher degree of complexity than our own minds. In Hayek's view, our minds can be described as extraordinarily complex structures of related elements and conceptual categories. Our minds are sustained by 150 billion neurons, but that is the biological description. In reality, how these neurons function, how they receive information, how they create, I have given you some intuitions, but they are very timid. I offered a very rough explanation as follows. In a certain part of our brains, in certain neurons, there lies a particular memory or bit of information from the past, and in another part there lies another, and it turns out that by combining them, we may get the idea for a project. We may create something new, something no one had ever thought of before. I am putting forward a tentative, awkward explanation, but it is not possible for me to provide a clearer one, because my mind cannot explain nor account for itself. For we know an order cannot account for itself, nor for another order of an equal degree, let alone a higher or much higher degree of complexity. The fact that we can't understand or comprehend anything about orders more complex than our own minds leads many people to assume that nothing exists beyond our minds, beyond what we can comprehend. However, I find this stance extremely reckless, because the first obligation of a scientist or any human being is to humbly acknowledge the limits of his or her own mind. In other words, to admit that people are very limited. To do this, we must allow for the possible existence of orders so complex that we do not understand them. And on a practical level, it is as if they do not exist. So, I find it reckless to claim that the world ends here, and that there are no orders more complex than the ones we can grasp with our little minds. A true scientist should be modest and leave open the possibility. He or she should say, well, I recognize my limitations, and that according to this Hayekian hypothesis, I can't understand anything more complex than my own mind. But I allow for the possible existence of orders or phenomena which have a higher degree of complexity and are beyond my understanding. The second step would be to ask you the following question. Does this mean we cannot come to know, I don't mean comprehend, understand, explain or account for, but know, anything about orders more complex than our minds? Well, there is a possible way for us to come to know something. Certainly we must acknowledge that we cannot understand or comprehend, etc., but there is a possible way. What is it? Well, we know we can't understand. We recognize that from the outset. But how can we come to know something? There is only one possible way. A little bird could come and tell us. We must leave that possibility open too. We can call it revelation. Someone reveals something to us or tells us something. Of course, the problem with a little bird coming and telling us something or revealing it to us is that we can't understand anything about an order that exceeds our own minds in complexity. So we have to believe. Notice what I am saying. I am saying that with our degree of conceptual complexity, we cannot account for nor understand any order more complex than our own. It's as if we were blind. Also, I am saying that any modest scientist must acknowledge the limits of his or her own mind and must not adamantly declare, "Nothing exists but what I can understand." At least a humble scientist should say, "I am open to the hypothesis that there are orders of such a degree of complexity that I cannot understand them." There is a further step, and many people take it based on belief. The belief that we can come to know something if it is revealed to us from outside and we accept that it is true. In other words, we make an act of faith. Then we can come to know something. A person might say, "Listen, the Holy Trinity, there's just no understanding that." True, but it's been revealed to us. And furthermore, I believe it. It can't be verified nor scientifically proven. In fact, no one can prove that it is false, nor that it is true, for it exceeds in complexity the sole instrument human beings depend on in our action and our lives, our own minds. I'll conclude by pointing out the main implications of the Hayek hypothesis. In what direction do relationships flow between the different orders? From the bottom up or from the top down? Many scientists think relationships flow from the bottom up. That is, they think physical and chemical reactions are the determining force in the world. These scientists are determinists or materialists. In a nutshell, today I went to a movie which made a certain impression on me. I then had a Coke which triggered certain physical reactions, and with that my behavior is predetermined, though we don't know how. Materialists hold that the simplest orders determine, from the bottom up, everything in the cosmos around us. In other words, cells and atoms are what led Beethoven to compose his Ninth Symphony. According to the Hayek hypothesis, this is nonsense. A simple order cannot account for more complex orders. Relationships must always flow from the top down. That is, complex orders explain, determine, understand, create, if you will, relatively simpler orders. However, we need only scratch the surface or think a little to discover that materialistic, deterministic ideology makes no sense, even if it is the one most scientists accept. If all of my creative behavior is actually determined by stimuli from the outside world, from the simplest orders, which is what determinists and materialists maintain, that's why they're called materialists, matter would determine spirit, instead of spirit determining matter. If, as materialists claim, the simpler orders determine the complex spiritual orders, then matter determines spirit. All my behavior, my being here, your reactions, all of this will be the result of chemical reactions in the brain and external stimuli. That's what they say. But let us apply materialistic determinism to materialistic determinism. Now we see, Mr. Materialistic Determinist, that your very idea, materialistic determinism, is also determined by external stimuli. And provided you wish to have a coherent viewpoint, you must see that if your idea that everything is determined by external stimuli is itself determined by external stimuli, then it lacks all foundation. It is simply the result of a chemical reaction of atoms. No, listen. I say external stimuli determine everything except my idea, which occurred to me and is creative, etc. The fact is, dear students, this is absurd. for it is not even possible to conceive of a world devoid of what classical philosophers called free will. Materialistic determinism does away with free will. It implies that everything we are doing, all of our behavior, and all human creativity, etc., is predetermined by certain chemical reactions and external stimuli. We cannot conceive of such a world. Our world is one of creativity, of ideas that occur to us and that we hadn't thought of before, ideas that might emerge or might not emerge. It is a spiritual world. Besides the fact that by its own standard, a deterministic world makes no philosophical sense, it is a world in which there would be no free will, and it is an unimaginable world. It is a world in which mankind is superfluous. It is a world of robotic beings and penguins, and that is precisely what most of my colleagues study when they insist on applying mathematics and the static view to economics. That is why, though it seems very abstract, the method is so attractive and also so challenging and so important. A world of robotic beings and penguins is a static world in which an increase in the population is counterproductive, since everything is given, and thus, the more penguins there are, the less each penguin gets. There are the same number of fish, and if there are many penguins, then each gets fewer fish, and the penguins go hungry. Materialistic determinism, the idea that the lower phenomena determine the higher phenomena, leads to the static view. It leads to Malthusianism. It leads to the notion that human beings are like rats, and the fewer there are, the better, etc. The approach of Hayek and Mises, that economics is a science of the spirit, of creative ideas, and that complex phenomena account for simple ones and not vice versa, in other words, relationships flow from the top down, leads to the dynamic view of the market. It leads to the idea that the central role belongs to creative human beings, endowed with a great creative capacity to discover new ends and means, and to the idea that the restrictions of the outside world are not given by the objective elements physicists study, but instead that the outside world changes every day as a result of entrepreneurial creativity. So, apart from the more or less theological digression we have made, that it seems anti-scientific to adamantly believe nothing can exist beyond our own minds, especially since we have the obligation to be modest and acknowledge the limitations on our minds, we must leave open the possibility that more complex orders exist. To better understand the essential methodological differences between the world of the natural sciences and that of the social sciences, let's outline these differences by contrasting the two worlds. Point number 1. The natural sciences study relatively simple phenomena, while the sciences of human action study relatively complex, or if you will, enormously complex phenomena. I repeat, the first point that distinguishes a natural scientist, a physicist, chemist, biologist or doctor, from an economist is that the physicist, chemist, biologist or doctor studies relatively simple phenomena, while we social scientists study enormously complex phenomena. Oh, come on. What is Professor Huerta de Soto saying? Everybody knows physicists study the most complicated stuff. Don't they study black holes, quarks? To me, that seems a lot more complicated than studying society. I mean, in the end, society? Pfft, anybody can talk about that. Politicians like Zapatero come and tell us what needs to be done. Raise wages, lower taxes. And the governor of the Bank of Spain says we need to increase the money supply. Anybody can talk about society, even a nobody, but you've got to study a lot to be a physicist. Despite appearances, the truth is quite the other way round. In fact, the phenomena of the social sciences are so complex that no one understands them, and therefore even the most ignorant people venture their opinion. Nobody dares offer an opinion on, say, nuclear fission without being an expert in atomic physics. Oh man, I better watch my step. I know nothing about this. Or on the body's reaction to chemotherapy. No, without having studied this, I'd better keep quiet. But everyone sounds off on what should be done regarding wages, the right to hire and fire, aid to the developing world, etc., when social phenomena are actually much more complex than those of the world of physics, or astronomy, or chemistry, or medicine. Precisely because they are more complex, we understand only a tiny fraction of them, and that is why the vast majority of people venture their opinion. for they are not even aware of what they don't know.
de aquello de lo que ignora. Pero los fenómenos del mundo de la economía.
However, the phenomena of the world of economics are far more complex than those of the world of physics. In economics, the concepts and categories are infinitely more complicated. Just think, there are 7 billion human beings, and they are all interacting with each other creatively. They are generating new knowledge that did not exist before, whereas no atom, no dwarf star, no supernova is creating, discovering or composing symphonies, nor writing a new television script, nor even possibly devising an operating system like Windows 95, etc.
Concebir un sistema operativo, Windows 95, etc.
I repeat, according to Hayek, by far the most complex order in the universe is the spontaneous market order or process. However, and I'll say it again, the great paradox lies in the fact that because human beings understand very little about the market process, they boldly voice their opinions and pontificate without knowing anything. Imagine the damage they could do that way. They could even destroy civilization.
Vamos al punto número 2
Let's move on to point number 2 of contrast. In the natural sciences, things, res in Latin, are the object of study.
en latín. Cosas, como por ejemplo, ¿qué? ¿Qué cosas?
Things. But what things, for example? A rock? A plant? A gallbladder?
Una vesícula biliar. Cosas.
Things.
En cambio, vamos a ver punto número 2 a la derecha.
Now, point number 2 from the other perspective. In the social sciences, things are not the object of research or study. In the social sciences, ideas, and here write ideas in capital letters and underline it, are the object of study. The ideas human beings have about their ends and means.
Los tienen sobre sus fines y sus medios. Esta es una diferencia
This is the fundamental difference between the world of the natural sciences and the world of the social sciences. In the natural sciences, we are always performing lab experiments, watching and analyzing the reactions of things external to us. In the social sciences, what we research are ideas that other people hold about what they do, that is, about their ends and their means. In his book, The Counter-Revolution of Science, Hayek offers the following example. He tells us that a cosmetic is not a cosmetic due to its chemical content, in other words, what's in the little jar from a chemical standpoint, but due to a belief certain human beings, men and women, hold that if they apply that particular cream every night, they'll wake up more attractive the next morning. Such a belief, held by one person, is sufficient to turn the cream into a cosmetic. In economics, it is not the chemical content of something that assigns it to the conceptual category of cosmetic. Instead, it is the ideas others have about that chemical content, the belief that it will enable them to achieve a certain end. The example I offer every year, I did it the other day in Poland and it caused quite an uproar, illustrates this perfectly. When I rip up the bill and we all feel our hearts sink, it is not the physical and chemical content of the bill, the cellulose and ink, that makes us feel that way. We feel that way because every one of us sees that bill as a means to achieve things of value. And we need the bill because it would enable one person to have lunch, another to get home, and another to make it to the end of the month, etc. And when I rip it up, that is precisely what I want to illustrate, that our hearts have sunk because of the ideas we have about the ends we could each satisfy with 10 euros. We say to ourselves, what is the professor doing? He's destroying something I need. Nevertheless, I am achieving something very important, and that is to emphasize that you are giving economic status to the bill, not because of its content of cellulose and ink, but because of your ideas, which are always spiritual, about the ends you could satisfy with that bill. Therefore, economics deals with the ideas other human beings have about what they do, their ends and their means, while the natural sciences deal with external things from the outside world.
Externas del mundo exterior. Punto número 3. Las cosas que estudian los científicos naturales.
Point number 3. The things natural scientists study are directly observable in the outside world. So with more or less difficulty we can observe a rock, a chemical compound, or a molecule, or a galaxy. Consider the universe. We look out and we see the night sky packed with stars. But if we get closer with a more powerful telescope, we discover that half of them are galaxies, like the Milky Way, which has 150 billion stars. Do you realize where we are in all of this? How small we are? We can observe those phenomena, those things in the outside world. We do so in a laboratory, or we dissect a cadaver, or we analyze a plant. Things in the outside world, which are the object of research in the natural sciences, are directly observable, with more or less difficulty. We may have to use an extraordinarily powerful telescope, or a laboratory experiment, or a linear accelerator, like the one inaugurated not too long ago in Switzerland. A machine for making two particles collide and observing the effect on antimatter. But these things are directly observable in the outside world, whereas, I ask you, has anyone ever seen an idea? Let's see, an idea. Hey, there's one now. I'm going to catch it. Oh no, the idea's getting away. Has anyone ever seen an idea? Ideas, which are the object of research in the social sciences, cannot be observed in the outside world.
Tan solo cabe interpretarlas.
They can only be interpreted in their historical context, in their particular historical and geographical circumstances. And we must have a prior theory that permits us to interpret them. In fact, all of the effort a social scientist makes from the perspective of a historian, we will talk more about history today and in the next class on method, consists of interpreting ideas which are not directly observable, but which can be interpreted in view of prior theoretical knowledge.
Vamos a ver, supongamos un acto de compraventa.
Let's see. Let's imagine a sales transaction. We go into a pharmacy to buy a cosmetic, and let's imagine that for the first time some newly arrived aliens are observing that act. They've just arrived at the speed of light, and by some procedure they are watching the transaction. They know nothing about mankind, nor do they have any prior knowledge. So what do they register? Well, they take the approach of a natural scientist and register what they can see, observable entities in the outside world. They say, there goes a carbon-based life form. It's in motion, and now it's moving a frame composed of plastic and glass, and a ding-dong has sounded. We don't know what that is, a sort of bell. And the life form is going up to another plastic frame. How very strange. Now a second carbon-based life form is coming out, and it starts to produce guttural sounds. And the first answers it with guttural sounds. The second moves back and extracts a glass jar with a highly complex chemical compound inside, which we've analyzed from above, and gives it to the first life form. And this is the strangest part of all. The first carbon-based life form hands over a piece of cellulose with ink on it and leaves. It moves away in another direction. The aliens haven't understood a thing. They've observed the scene, that is, what was directly observable from the outside, from the perspective of a natural scientist, but they haven't understood anything. However, as human beings, if we have a prior theory, we are able to interpret this scene as a sales transaction, the same scene the aliens described in such a bizarre way, using mundane terms. In other words, we've seen a human being, which is a being who acts, has ends and happens to value waking up in the morning more attractive than the day before. He or she goes into a pharmacy, and we have a concept of what that is, and a clerk comes out. The two discuss the different products, the clerk hands the customer a cosmetic, and the customer pays with money. Money is not money because of its essential physical components, but because the parties who participate in the process of social cooperation view it as a commonly and generally accepted means of exchange, whether it comes in the form of a piece of paper, gold, head of cattle, etc. We'll talk about this more when the time comes. Clearly, to understand what human beings do in the social world, we must have a prior theoretical framework that enables us to interpret ideas. As social scientists, that is the only way we can approach our object of research. Point number 4.
En el mundo de la ciencia
In the world of the natural sciences, constant relationships exist between phenomena.
entre los fenómenos. ¿Por qué?
Why? Well, we don't know. The fact is that they do exist. Whenever 2 atoms of hydrogen bond with 1 atom of oxygen, a molecule of water results.
Oxígeno, hay una molécula de agua.
And if we turn on a light switch, there is a flow of energy and the bulb lights up.
Y mañana,
And tomorrow, the sun will rise at a time we know to within 1/100th of a second. A nautical almanac can give us that information.
es cierto que conforme
It's true that when we approach more complex phenomena, constancy is no longer in absolute terms, but in probabilistic terms.
en términos no
For instance, we know that in 80% of breast cancer cases treated with a certain type of chemotherapy, the cancer is cured. And it isn't cured in the other 20%.
y el otro 20% no se cura.
Nevertheless, the results do reflect constancy, though in probabilistic terms.
Pues bien, esto es otro
Well,
punto de
this is another point of radical difference with the world of the social sciences, because in the social sciences there are no constants.
constantes. Todo
Everything is variable.
variables.
Why are there no constants in the world of social science? Why is everything variable? What is the object of research in the social sciences, in economics?
Economía, las
Ideas. And ideas, dear students, are not given.
dadas, sino que continuamente cambian.
Instead, they change constantly as a result of human beings' creative capacity, which is the most intimate characteristic of our nature. Human beings have an especially creative nature. What do human beings create? Ideas. Ideas about what? Ends and means. How? Constantly.
Por eso, el objeto de investigación de la ciencia
So the object of research in the social sciences consists of something that is perpetually changing, and therefore there are no constants.
hay constancias. Esto hacía, recuerden,
If you recall, that is why the future is always ineradicably uncertain,
en el sentido de que no está ahí por venir, como en el
in
mundo
the sense that it is not to come, like in the world of the natural sciences, but is to be made, and we must make it with our entrepreneurship. Our entrepreneurial capacity helps us to cope with this uncertainty, in that we tend to achieve the goals we set for ourselves, though these goals, which are the ends we value, are not given, but remain open to our ability to create, modify, join or vary them, or change them altogether.
unirlo, matizarlo o cambiar de fin. ¿eh? Y también nos enfrentamos,
Institutions are the other tool that helps us face the ineradicably uncertain future.
recuerden, las instituciones son comportamientos
As you know, institutions, for instance, language, morality, law, money, are patterned behaviors we learn to adopt because we realize that they help us accomplish our ends.
el derecho, el dinero. Bien, esto
So, these are the 2 tools, if you will, that human beings have for facing the future, which is ineradicably uncertain, because it depends on our creative capacity with respect to ends and means.
no nos engañemos pensando que esto da
Let's not kid ourselves into thinking these tools give constancy to the world. They simply permit us to contend with ineradicable uncertainty a bit more successfully. Even the social phenomena you think are the most constant are continually changing.
constantemente cambiando. Y no confundamos una variación
We mustn't mistake slow change for an absence of change. Even Spanish, as an evolutionary language we have inherited from our parents, is not a dead thing that will be spoken forever and ever, just as we are speaking it now. On the contrary, it is continually being altered due to entrepreneurial use, and new terms appear.
y aparecen nuevos.
Many times my children use language I don't understand. Anyway, what I'm explaining is actually quite simple. If we could get into a time machine and travel back 50, 60, 100 years, we would see that the Spanish spoken then was not exactly the same as it is now, and it won't be the same 100 years from now either. It appears to be the same, but it's not. Even in the case of what appear to be the most constant institutional behaviors, we must not mistake slow change for an absence of change. For in the world of economic science, there are no constants. Everything is variable, in the sense that the object of research is ideas, and ideas are subject to human beings' entrepreneurial creativity, which is our most innate characteristic. The quintessential feature of our human nature is creativity.
Y eso es lo que nos diferencia.
That's what distinguishes us from a piece of rock, a liver or a plant.
La verdad es que los
The fact is, though what I'm saying may seem abstract, it's actually pretty obvious.
Y claro, nos tiene que ser obvio que si estamos estudiando
It should be plain to us that if we are studying the ideas people generate, how people act and how they interact, and as social scientists who view man as a creative actor, we clearly need to use a method radically different from the one suited to a natural scientist, who studies rocks, atoms, plants and livers, none of which are creative.
no son creativos. Debe de ser ya
At this stage, it should be obvious that it is much more commendable to be a social scientist than a natural scientist. It's much more difficult to discover the scientific truth in our field than in that of physics or chemistry, regardless of how much math natural scientists use, how many men they put on the moon, and how many bridges they build, etc. Point number 5, our last point.
y último.
In the world of the natural sciences,
No
the ultimate causes of phenomena are unknown.
fenómenos. ¿Cuál es la causa
What is the ultimate cause of the law of
de
gravity?
la gravedad? Siempre hay
There is always another cause to which we can attribute studied phenomena.
los fenómenos investigados.
In fact,
Nunca se termina.
natural science never ends, because a further cause is always discovered. That is the essence of the process of advancement in the natural
La
sciences.
ciencia natural. Como no saben los científicos
Since natural scientists don't know the ultimate causes of phenomena,
los fenómenos, establecen
they
relaciones
establish functional relationships between them.
funcional.
What is a function?
Una función es una
A function is a correspondence between two sets, the original set and the image set,
conjunto imagen. La correspondencia
a one-to-one correspondence.
uno a uno, ¿eh? Y se
So
dice
we say that y is f of x.
por cada
For each member of the original set, there is a corresponding member of the image set.
elemento del conjunto imagen. Y se puede incluso
We could even draw a graph.
hacer una representación gráfica.
Nevertheless, because natural scientists don't know the ultimate cause of phenomena, they can actually express their functions in inverse form. In other words, they don't know if y is f of x or x is g of y, the inverse function, for they don't know the ultimate cause of phenomena.
Entonces, las relaciones
So the relationships natural scientists study are functional relationships of mutual determination.
mutua determinación.
Y is f of x or x is g of y. They are reciprocal relationships.
La ciencia natural
Natural science consists of finding the constant parameters of those functions.
funciones, aunque no sepan
Those scientists don't know the ultimate cause of phenomena, and a mutual relationship exists between them.
relación entre los mismos.
In contrast,
En el mundo
in the
de la-
world of the social sciences, we do know the ultimate cause of phenomena. The truth is, God had made it pretty damned hard for us economists. I mean, what a situation. Pretty tough.
menuda.
Are we going to be able to do a little economics, what with 6 billion men, women and children, each discovering what they please at every moment? Granted, institutional behavior and people's capacity to achieve what they desire, or to tend to achieve it, make it a little easier, but still, well, at least he wanted to compensate us with a few things, because if not, we would be lost as social scientists.
Sociales.
And one of the things he has compensated us with is the fact that in economics we do know the ultimate cause of all phenomena. The ultimate cause, which gives rise to all phenomena, is precisely the concept of human action.
Es el punto
It is
de
the starting point, the irreducible premise,
combustible,
the original cause of all the phenomena we are going to study. Therefore, in economics, relationships are not functional, as in y is f of x or x is g of y, but instead they are, please write this down, genetic causal. We know the origin of phenomena, and the origin is creative, entrepreneurial human action, and it generates all the other laws successively. In economics, relationships are unidirectional. They start from an origin, creative, entrepreneurial human action. And from there we are going to gradually construct all the laws of economic science. In contrast, natural scientists do not know the origin of phenomena, their ultimate cause. What they do is establish constant relationships through laboratory experiments, and they analyze these relationships as functions that can be expressed in inverse form. They analyze reciprocal relationships.
La conclusión
Our analysis leads us to a double conclusion.
y es que las
The
ciencias
social sciences are in both a superior and an inferior position with respect to the natural sciences.
superioridad y de inferioridad respecto de las ciencias naturales.
The sense in which social scientists find themselves in an inferior position is obvious. It's clear, for we have enormous difficulty in practicing our discipline,
Porque
because the object of research is not directly observable. It is ideas, and they cannot be measured. There is no constancy. Everything is variable.
pero sin embargo,
Nevertheless, something compensates us for this and places us in a superior position with respect to natural scientists. I'm referring to a point I have just made. In economics, we do know the original cause of all phenomena. It is human action, and relationships are genetic, causal, and unidirectional. Human action gives rise to everything else. There is another sense in which we are in a superior position, and I think I have mentioned it in class. Only in social science does the scientist share the same nature as those he or she observes. In other words, believe it or not, I am a human being, and I share the same nature as the human beings I analyze as an economist, and this provides me with first-hand knowledge of incalculable value. Natural scientists lack this knowledge of their object of research. I am a human being who acts, and therefore I know by introspection, introspección in Spanish, the word refers to the observation of one's own ideas, thoughts and feelings, which leads to intimate first-hand knowledge. I know by introspection what it is to act.